Started, Mridul?
Good evening and a warm welcome to all. I am Mridul Mishra from the corporate communication team, and on behalf of CARE Ratings, welcome you to our today's webinar on renewable power. We sincerely appreciate your time in joining us for this webinar. I would now request Mr. Amod Khanorkar, who is a Senior Director at CARE Ratings, to take over the proceedings, please.
Thanks, Mridul. Very warm welcome to all the participants and the guest speakers. Today's topic for our webinar is renewable power, re-energizing growth and balancing risks. So let me quickly take you through as to why we thought of this topic and a bit of a details over there. As you are aware, over a period of time, importance of renewable power in the energy palette of the country, it has only increased over a period of time. If you really look at sort of growth that we have seen, it's astounding, something like 52% over a 10-year period in a CAGR terms. Renewable power today, we have something like installed capacity of about 95 gigawatt, by and large equally split between both solar and wind. Government of India has ambitious goal of achieving something like 175 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2022 and about 450 gigawatt by 2030. The sector saw a very fast-paced growth till FY17 for wind and something like till FY18 for solar. The growth subsided in last 2-3 years due to increased uncertainties. You know, if I were to name a few, there will be erratic resource availability for wind power, counterparty credit quality issues such as payment, PPA renegotiations. You know, some of these things just have a pretty debilitating effect on confidence of the developers. Some supply side related issues such as solar modules and so on. And then last but not the least, the COVID related challenges, which also brought in its own set of uncertainties. You know, however, this renewable power has been a very important theme and a scheme for Government of India. And government to address some of these challenges responded with alacrity, and sector saw some of the action, significant amount of action on policy front during the last 1 year. You know, if I were to name a few, it will be government's push for PLI scheme for module manufacturing, ISTS waiver extension for 2 years, something like extension of time to address COVID-induced delays and so on. You know, today we have a wonderful panel to discuss and deliberate on some of these issues. What we do is this. You know, my team, Sudhir and Kunal, they will make a presentation and table our thoughts as to how we look at some of these issues. Panel discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague Sachin, who's my CRO. I will take about 5 minutes very quickly to introduce the panel. Today we have Mr. S. Kasturi, who's Chief of Treasury and Investor Relations at Tata Power. He's responsible for managing fundraising activities at Tata Power and subsidiaries. Also responsible for handling investor and other stakeholder relationships. Prior to joining Tata Power, he was with NTPC, which is the largest power generating company in the country, and also with some of the private developers in the country. He's very experienced in resource mobilization, both on equity and on debt fund. Welcome, Mr. Kasturi. It's a pleasure to have you here on the panel today. Next, we have Mr. Kaushal Shah. Kaushal Bhai, again an old acquaintance. He's been with Adani Energy, Green Energy since April 21. He's its CFO. He's been with the group for a long time and has held leadership positions in multiple companies in the group. He has a rich experience in finance functions, including value creation, corporate governance, risk management, M&A, treasury, to name a few. To his credit, he mobilized something like USD 7 billion in two of the companies where he worked, Adani Transmission and Adani Green. He's a CA by profession, 1993 batch, holds a bachelor's degree from Gujarat University and PGDI SA from ICAI, member of Sustainability Reporting Standards Board of ICAI. Welcome, Kaushal Bhai. Nice to have you here. Next, we have Parag Sharma, who's not joined yet.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I think there's some technical difficulty at Parag's end. He's not yet joined, but quickly I'll run through his profile. So maybe, yeah. So Parag is a founder and CEO of O2 Power. It's a renewable platform backed by EQT and Temasek. Parag is an industry leader. He holds the position of a vice chairman at CII's National Committee on Atmanirbhar Bharat RE Manufacturing. He's also VC at Wind Independent Power Producers Association. He spent something like in the past 10 years in consulting in infrastructure sector with KPMG, MBA from IIT Delhi, a law graduate and an engineering graduate from AMU. Parag is yet to join. Hopefully, another 5-10 minutes he should be with us. We also have Mr. Jha from PFC. Praveen Kumar Sinha, he couldn't join because MOP had sort of called him at short notice. And Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Jha, he was kind enough to agree and fill in his place. Mr. Jha has been working with PFC since 1997, a total of 32 years of experience, and currently he holds a position of ED projects at PFC. Entire loan portfolio in construction lending with PFC as a lead FI, he has handled that. He's led the renewable energy portfolio at PFC. Earlier, he worked with Vizag Steel Plant, holds a bachelor's degree in engineering, mechanical engineering from NIT Jamshedpur of Ranchi University, and a diploma in management from IGNOU. Welcome, Mr. Jha, and thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you. And today we have my colleague Sachin, who will be, this panel the panel discussion will be moderated by my colleague Sachin. Sachin is my CRO, Chief Ratings Officer, joined us recently from CRISIL, where he was heading the corporate and infrastructure ratings as Senior Director, civil engineer by profession from Delhi College of Engineering, and an MBA Finance from FMS Delhi. Welcome, Sachin. Thanks for joining. So what we do is now is this: we quickly go through the presentation which will be made by my colleagues. My colleague Sudhir will be presenting. He's a director and he looks after power sector, specializes in that. So we go through the presentation wherein we present our views, post which we will have a panel discussion which Sachin will moderate, and subsequent to that we will have a Q&A session with the audience. So with that, I will not take much time. Sudhir, can you please take over and start the presentation?
Yeah. Thank you, Amod, for the introduction. A very good afternoon, friends, and I thank all the participants who have taken time today from their busy schedules to attend the webinar today. My name is Sudhir Kumar, and as Amod mentioned, I look at infrastructure ratings, particularly the energy. And I would be making a brief presentation today and elaborating on few of the risks which Amod briefly talked about in his opening remarks. So renewable sector has been one of the success stories of the past decade. Not only has the sector has done exceedingly well in India, but its success is also well comparable to the top economies of the world. While over the past couple of years, the sector has slowed down, but we believe the current year would be one of the best years in terms of capacity additions, thanks to the healthy project pipeline and applicability of new duty structure, which is applicable from April 2022, thus precipitating the capacity addition. Further, while the sector is turning corner, we believe few of the risks will determine its growth curve, which notably are elevated module prices, erratic payment by discoms, uncertainty in resource for wind projects, and regulatory surprises, to name a few. So coming to the overall sector overview, India has total of 384 gigawatt of installed power generation capacity as on June 30th, 2021. Within this, while coal continues to be the mainstay, accounting for 54% of installed capacity, it is the renewable sector which is continuously increasing its share in the overall pie, with the current share at around 25%. Within renewable capacity, installed solar capacity has surpassed the installed wind capacity addition for the first time ever on a cumulative basis, and it stood at 42 gigawatt as against wind capacity, which stood at around 39 gigawatt. The southern and the western region dominated the renewable capacity additions, largely because of the resource availability for both the kind of projects. The healthy performance of the renewable sector was not only in India, but the sector has also performed substantially well as compared to the major economies globally. As evident from the graph, India is among the top 5 markets globally in solar and wind installed capacity addition, and there is a 10-year CAGR of around 52% in terms of growth. Despite this handsome performance, there is still a scope of improvement if we see the CAGR growth achieved by the countries like China and United States, which have gotten a CAGR of upwards of 80% over a 10-year period. Coming to the next part of the sector overview, while India has performed decently well as compared to its global counterparts, however, the growth has tempered both in solar and wind capacity addition over the last 3 to 4 years. The muted capacity addition has been due to the various issues, including regulatory uncertainties, shift of wind sector from FIT regime to auction-based mechanism, coupled with disruption which were caused by COVID-19 pandemic. On the positive side, though, notwithstanding the lower growth which has been seen in last few years, India has substantially closed the gap with the target of 175% once considered audacious by the industry pundits. Apart from the push by Government of India towards the renewable sector, one thing which has distinctively added to the success of the sector over the past couple of years is the declining tariff. Notwithstanding the grid instability related issues, the sector has been able to attract the attention of off-takers and developers alike. The favorable government policies, interest among global funds towards renewable sector in India, lower interest rate scenario, increasing competitive intensity are some of the factors that have cumulatively led to declining tariffs, both in solar as well as wind segment. The decline in tariff is stark in case of solar projects, where tariff has touched the all-time low of ₹1.99 per unit in FY21. In contrast to this, the tariffs in wind segment, barring the ISTS 1 tender, has largely been range-bound between 2.44 to 2.99 rupees per unit. Further, there has been very limited tenders seen in hybrid side, and the participation from the developers has been relatively low in this particular tenders. Now coming to the main part of our presentation, which is the risk in the sector today. In our experience as one of the leading rating agencies in renewable sector, we are seeing these risks which are cropping up and may impact the renewable energy projects in short to medium term. We will be covering all these risks in detail in the subsequent few slides. Coming to risk number 1, as we all know, in any power project, cash flow certainty is the key. In the power value chain, DISCOM is generally the weakest link, and renewable sector's experience with that is no exception. RE sector has been facing delays from some of the state DISCOMs in the past. However, this elongation in data cycle has worsened post the onset of COVID pandemic. The worst elongation in receivable period has been seen in the states of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, where data cycle is almost 2 years now, which used to be 1 year pre-COVID level. Also, we are seeing an alarming trend where few DISCOMs like Maharashtra and MP are showing differentiated payment patterns toward wind and solar project, with data cycle significantly elongated in the wind side, which was set up under the FIT regime, while the payment pattern continues to be satisfactory for all the solar projects. Coming to the second risk, which we are covering here, which is the uncertainty over the availability of wind resource, which has led to negative deviation in the actual plant performance. FY21 was one of the worst years for wind sector, with PLF significantly dropping vis-a-vis P90 estimates, as well as the FY20 PLF levels. This pattern was largely consistent across all windy states, with PLFs down by 10 to 16%, except for AP, wherein it was doubly hit by low wind availability as well as grid curtailments. However, the solar side generation performance continues to be largely stable, with deviation both positive as well as negative, limiting between 1 to 4% in majority of these states. FY21 was a relatively better year for solar sector as compared to FY20. Cash flow certainty is expected to be more stable in solar projects, given the generation trend, provided DISCOMs continue to make payment in the timely manner. Now coming to risk number 3, which is currently playing out specific to the solar sector, and that is the steep rise in the price of modules and BOS in the last 6 months or so. Module cost, which used to be less than 20 US cents per watt, is now hovering at around 25 to 26 US cents per watt. The same has led to the envisaged project cost for all the developers, leading to debt coverage indicators and project returns getting impacted. Given current module prices, total capacity is to be negatively impacted for around 2 gigawatt, where projects have been won at competitively very high competitive tariff of less than 2 rupees 30 paisa per unit. However, in case of further increase in module prices, more projects may get impacted and impact the viability of such projects from both debt as well as equity perspective. Coming to the fourth risk, though the government of India has been coming out with conducive policies to support timely support on multiple instances in the past, like reinforcement of must-run status for RE project, extension and construction timeline, ISTS waiver, etc., the sector continues to be marred by negative surprises on regulatory front. The PSA backlog continue to hamper the growth in the sector, as large capacities of more than 20 gigawatt await signing of back-to-back offtake arrangement with the DISCOMs. Some of these projects have been bid out since December 2019, and still there is no success in PSA signing. Further, the PPA renegotiation matter continues to be an open issue since July 2019, with no resolution in sight. Government of India is trying to address few of the uncertainties through proposed Electricity Amendment Act, which is expected to be taken up by Union Government for approval in some time. The same would take care of few of the issues concerning the sector, with the establishment of Electricity Contract Enforcement Authority, stricter compliance of RPOs, introduction of distribution sub-licensee, and DBT in power sector, among others. However, its acceptability and approval in its original form remains to be seen. All in all, we believe continued focus on RE sector and stress on reducing carbon footprint would lead to receipt of continuous support from Government of India on policy front. However, some of the issues which we just enumerated need to be addressed in a timely manner to re-energize the sector. With this, I end my presentation and hand it over to Amod for further proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Sudhir. That was a wonderful presentation. I see Parag had joined. Hi, Parag. Welcome to this event. We were waiting for you. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Amod.
Thanks. Great. Maybe now we have all the panelists here. So I will request Sachin to start the panel discussion and moderate it, please. So over to you, Sachin.
Yeah, thanks, Amod. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Amod and Sudhir, for the presentation and the opening remarks, and thanks all the panelists for joining in, and thanks to the participants for kind of being there to kind of as a part of the audience. So the first question, I would like to actually put it to Parag. Parag, basically, you would have seen in our presentation, what really the team was trying to say is that while there was a big flip to the sector, both wind and then to solar, and we did reach up to a total capacity additions of 6 to 7 or 7 gigawatts or so. The last 2-3 years, for multiple reasons, we are not really seeing it breaching that level. Now, while the team has shared some of the thoughts in terms of why it could be, whether it's the pricing or whether it's the discounts or whether it's the regulatory approvals, etc. I just because you are setting up a completely new setup, and I'm sure you are looking at growth in the sector. What is your view? Do you think we are at some level going to plateau at this level in terms of capacity additions, or is there a next wave of growth that we foresee in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, Sachin, first of all, Sudhir has very comprehensively covered all the points, and he mentioned that what are the different reasons because of which currently there is some bit of slowdown in the sector. But having said that, I think credit goes to the MNRE and its bodies like SECI and TPC, that even in the COVID period, significant number of bids were out. Now, the real challenge is that there is a delay in execution on ground. And the delay in execution on ground is because of reasons like, one is obviously 2 waves of COVID, then the GIB order of Supreme Court has been a big deterrent. So we all believe that the 1 gigawatt capacity of 2020 in wind and maybe 3-4 gigawatt of capacity addition in solar it's just a one-off thing, and because of these 2 or 3 delays, very low capacity addition has happened maybe last year or maybe this year also. But then on an average, if you see the Bridge to India latest report also, and I largely agree with that report, they're talking about 65 gigawatt of solar capacity addition to be done over the next 5 years. So market should stabilize at somewhere around 10 to 15 gigawatts a year of capacity addition. There would be an accumulation of a lot of capacities suddenly in the next year. We all are hopeful that a lot of PSAs which are not being signed will soon get signed. Some of the IPPs are also fine absorbing BCD so that finally the things start moving forward. So a lot of movement is happening so that at least the next calendar year there is a significant capacity addition which seems to be happening.
Got it. Thanks, Parag. Mr. Kaushal Shah from Adani Green, what would be your thoughts, sir, in terms of incremental capacity additions that we are likely to see? What is your sense?
I can completely agree with what Parag has said. Actually, what has happened that last year, as he rightly mentioned, because of pandemic, we missed around 7 to 8 gigawatts, which were expected to be completed. So overall plan was around 17, 18 gigawatts. But I think this year, we feel personally, from the company side, we feel that this year is much better now when the second wave has gone. So we feel that whatever was the backlog of last year of around 7 to 8 gigawatts plus a 9 of current year should take around 20. And as we move forward, overall there should be over a period of 3 to 5 years, this should be in the range of 60-65. If you look at overall, is the demand for power is also, which was 110 billion units before the pandemic times. Post this, which has come down to 86 billion units. But then, now again, it has come back to 121 billion units. And overall, in last 2 years to 3 years, if you look at the, the capacity addition, the majority of addition is only in the renew, and thanks to the government on big thrust on this particular sector. So we see that, this is one of which has happened, but, moving forward, there will be a good pace in terms of capacity addition in this particular sector.
Got it. Thanks. I'd like to get in Mr. Kasturi in this. Mr. Kasturi, you have, most part of your professional life you've actually spent on thermal, as I understand, and now we are seeing a scenario wherein hardly any new thermal projects are kind of getting built. So what is and now obviously you are looking at renewable as well. So in terms of conventional versus renewable, if we can, because both Parag and Mr. Kaushal mentioned about being good times for renewable. What is your sense? I mean, is the thermal thing done and dusted now, or do you see some bit of a revival on the thermal power as well in the context of renewable? I mean, I know this seminar is about renewable, but I think somewhere they are going to be competing options going forward. So your take on that?
Yeah, no, Sachin. I think I completely agree with the other panelists in the sense that renewable capacity is going to grow, and I think while maybe still sort of writing the end log for thermal that done and dusted may still be slightly premature because there will be some capacities, but I think most of the players like us also, I mean, we have decided that we will not going forward add any thermal capacity, whether through greenfield or through acquisition. So in that sense, I think more and more of obviously developers are going to do that. So it will therefore certainly be that it will be more and more of green capacities, but just for the fact that because India still has a large coal reserve, and therefore the cost of that coal is also, I mean, cheap, though the renewable power is just giving the coal capacities a run for the money. But I think still I think there will be some capacity will come up, but largely I think it is going to be green from now on. And for us also, I think, and not only purely from the perspective of I mean the plans or anything for the government, but even investors across and even lenders for that matter, everybody is sort of now focused on ESG, and there's a significant amount of pressure from all the sides to lend money or put equity money only for the green initiative. So in that context, I think it is now going to be from here on more and more of green, less and less of coal. Yeah.
Okay, got it. I like to get in Mr. Jha from PFC, to give a lender's perspective. While all the three panelists, did agree that this is the way to go, but somewhere, in terms of interest of Indian banking system to lend to infra in general and including renewable is not that they don't seem to be that excited. While yes, equity investments are happening and global players are coming in, but from a pure debt funding perspective, so what is your sense? Is the sector now mature enough to be easily able to get low cost debt funding, long tenor debt funding, a typical project financing for that? Because we still see some of the kind of risks remaining. So how as a lender you are seeing it?
I would like to first thank CARE for inviting me as a panelist on such a like important issue and very prevalent issue, very important issue on renewable power. And as regard the question raised by Mr. Sachin, my idea is like I don't see that there is any challenge for getting debt funding for renewable energy. If you see, at least from PFC perspective, I can tell you that we have in last 5 years almost 44% CAGR in renewable energy funding. So, and we are one of the largest lender and possibly the largest lender in the power sector. And renewable, we have been doing it quite regularly, and we also give them long-term loan. It's not that it is a 10-year loan. We give at least like 16, 17-year door-to-door or even 18-year in some cases door-to-door repayment. So the important part here is that yes, renewable is the thing and lenders are actually interested, but there are various challenges. Various challenges means like, as you have asked Mr. Sundararajan the question that whether thermal is done and dusted, I have a different perspective. I always feel that like a few power plants, almost like 35,000 megawatt, we have almost completed 40 years of their life. And if you want to phase them out, ultimately the purpose of having a renewable power station is to reduce the carbon footprint. And those power plants are so old that they are consuming much more coal than a newer coal-based power plant. So if you have to reduce the carbon footprint, we can't allow those power plants to run. And if you want to replace those power plants, it can't be like because you can't replace a base load station with a like a renewable thing which is seasonal and which is like fluctuating from time to time their power output. So therefore, there would be some scope for even some coal-based power stations coming up, but renewable is the future, and renewable has to come up. And as a lender, we are keen to support renewable. But there are other challenges that beyond a certain installed capacity, if you go, there are grid issues which will come up, because it's like during daytime you have solar, and I do not know, because we have still sufficient installed capacity of thermal, and we do not know whether we continue to have so much growth in demand unless until we have the industrialization also moving up in the same direction. So there would be challenges for renewable unless until, like of late, we have also seen that hybrid power is coming up, and like coal, wind, and then solar, and then some storage. Those kind of combinations are coming up. So ultimately, there has to be some kind of solution and some kind of thought process which should come up. Otherwise, it should not so happen that like either solar has to be backed up, or during the season wind has to be backed down, and like if things are running well, then the coal-based power station have to be backed down. So these are the certain risks which we are seeing as a lender, but definitely all risks has certain mitigation, and we are working on that.
Got it. Parag, a very quick question, then I will ask you a more detailed question. Your quick take on the access to debt funding. Has that kind of matured? You've been in the sector for a very long time. So is that access to debt funding is as good as it should be, or you still feel there is some distance to cover there?
So things have improved significantly, Sachin. If you see the number of ECB lenders who are keen to fund, and at least the projects which are SECI, NTPC, NHPC projects are increasing year by year. There might be more than a dozen ECB lenders who have started funding. And there was a time, maybe 5 years back only, hardly one or two ECB lender was interested in India. And even the pace at which PFC and REC now have started supporting the sector, that has been amazing. The setback obviously is that SBI, Canara Bank, and the other PSU banks, they are not so aggressively funding renewable sector. If they also start funding, and if the bond market, domestic bond market really develops, then it would be a really great scenario for the renewable sector in India. The challenge that we are seeing is that if there is a state level PPAs, then obviously the lenders are very, very limited.
Got it. No, you are right, and you've said it very rightly. I think the state level PPAs is where the counterparty risk is a little difficult to kind of comprehend in box for a classic project finance lender. So coming to that,
Sachin, I would like to add here, on the debt side, frankly, what I echo also again, Parag, we have been able to tie up the construction facility, which is the first time in the India, of $1.35 billion for our hybrid projects. And almost 12 international banks have participated into this entire funding. And this is a unique kind of a facility whereby, they initially fund the projects. Once become COD, there is a go-to-market condition. So you get it rated well in advance, and then you take out through the international bond. So this is, if you are in the right things, and then obviously, as Parag mentioned, some of the DISCOM, they are apprehended of funding. But if you have a right mix, like 80% SECI, NTPC, and 20%, let's say, state, then probably, they are much comfortable funding such kind of things. But, this has significantly improved over last couple of years on this particular count. I just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks for making that point. And you're right. I mean, my question was more in terms of what Parag also mentioned. The more mainstream lenders are still shying away a little bit. That is, they maybe were, say for something like a road or other infra assets, they are still more amenable. Maybe the international investors or lenders are more open to it, as he mentioned, ECBs, etc. But fine, I think that is
again, Sachin, there is a big issue for the wind asset funding compared to the solar. Solar, okay. Generally, compared to both the assets, solar generally, all the banks or institutions are willing to fund. But on the wind front, normally, they are more cautious, and they took. But if you have done a right kind of a study, if you have, because we use wind mask, and if you have a last 20-year study and the pattern and all of that stuff, and if you provide all of that data, then I don't see any challenges in that funding as well.
Got it. Got it. So let me come back to Parag. Parag, this is, you mentioned about this, the state level discoms and all that. What we are seeing right now, that this whole SECI structure is there in place, right? But then ultimately SECI in some ways is a pass-through mechanism. They don't buy power for themselves, but they will need to have a back-to-back arrangement or a PSA, as we call it, with the discoms. Now, in some cases, we've seen that the discoms are still, dragging their feet in terms of signing, and there is a fair bit of backlog which is there, where SECI has kind of optioned it. They've got developers, but the ultimate off-taker is not really there. Do you see that as a big challenge because ultimate demand has to come in from discoms, and if they drag their feet, and maybe if you can throw a bit of light as to why they are dragging the feet, because now at 2 rupees ballpark power, I mean, they are very clearly cheaper than the other options. So why is it that we are seeing that backlog build up? Over to you, Parag.
So Sachin, are you talking about payment not being made by discom?
No. I'm not talking about payments. I'm saying signing of the PPA, the primary PPA will be signed between a developer and SECI, and then SECI will have to in turn sign a PSA, power sale agreement with a discom, right? That's the model which is there for many of these bids that SECI does. So what we are seeing is that SECI will bid out the project and there will be a selection, but then the signing of the second level leg, which is with the discom, is kind of, there is a backlog there. And that's where it's kind of causing some challenge. So this is not on a payment side. Maybe we'll cover that also, but right now it's on signing of the contract.
No, so look, if you look from the discom side, it is so confusing for them that what is the right tariff in the solar sector. 1.5 years back, there was a 292 tariff, and that was also competitively being discovered, and that's the main tender which is still pending for PSA signing. It's a manufacturing tender. So out of 18 to 20 gigawatt of unsigned PPAs, 12 gigawatt is coming from one single tender. And as government was trying to sell this 12 gigawatt of power, the other bids which came after that, they were kept on hold. And the whole effort of SECI and all the institutions were, let first this 12 gigawatt slightly higher tariff being sold. And by the time they were able to sell this capacity substantially, the COVID hit and there were delays related to it. And the tariff really dropped to the point of 199 or 198. And then the confusion started happening between discoms. So if you talk about Gujarat, their APPC or average power procurement cost would be 5 rupees plus. So as such, even at 292 is not an issue for them. But when they start comparing within the solar, that 1 year back the tariff was 292, now the tariff is 2 rupees. So that's a different matter now. Again, the tariff is back to 250, 260 because of BCD. So discoms don't understand these nuances and they really get confused. And the other major issue which is happening in our sector is that one government entity is trying to compete with the other entity. If SECI is trying to close a PPA, let's say of 2 rupees 50 paise, NTPC will go to the same state and offer 242. Or reverse may happen in some other state. So everything should be channelized, and I think that's what MNRE is trying to do. There should be only one entity which calls all the bids so that this confusion doesn't happen. If you look at the wind sector, that has played much better. Whenever they were able to sell a particular bid power, only then they came out with the next bid. And that's the good thing about wind and hybrid. None of the capacity is unsold. Everything was done more systematically. While in the solar, so many number of bids were brought out without waiting for the first round of bid to be sold, which is really causing this issue. It's not a question of tariff being high or tariff being low or demand not being there. It is more of a question of not following the right sequence, I would say.
Very interesting, Parag. I think you certainly gave a new perspective, and it may be, once they will also get a hang of it and kind of make it a bit more orderly. Let me get in Mr. Kasturi, and the point is on the again staying with the DISCOMs. The other issue, which is, I mean, the always discussed issue in terms of risk of delays of payment from the DISCOMs. Now, here, what we have seen is that some DISCOMs, they actually do a little bit of differential treatment between different types of generators. And here I'm again talking about, say, comparing renewables versus thermal power generators. What is your sense? I mean, since you have an experience of both the sides of these power generation, how do you see it's kind of playing out? And maybe while we don't have a DISCOM representative on the panel, maybe we can get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. But maybe because we are also a DISCOM, so we'll give you the DISCOM perspective also.
Oh, yes.
Of course, we don't make any delays in payment, but still. No, so actually, if you look at it from a DISCOM perspective, I mean, there is a fundamental issue, and we all know that. I mean, like, there's absolutely no two ways that the DISCOMs are obviously what they are in terms of their financial health and so on and so forth. And that's something which I think reams and reams of, reports have been written on around those in terms of what you do. So I think, so it's a fundamental issue with that. And now, in that fundamental issue, if you say that the DISCOM has X amount of ability to pay, and where does it choose to pay then? Is then the question. First of all, I think therefore the problem is fundamental. I don't think there's any distinction between thermal. So we have both thermal and renewable capacity, and even if you look at the sectoral level, I think both thermal as well as the renewable capacities have views which are outstanding. So it's not that it's just you can choose. But then if you have a choice in terms of prioritizing as to which is the payment you will want to make first, I think it will naturally be from if you are a player who has a problem in terms of your capacity to pay, you will probably choose to pay first the thermal, because there you know that the other side, which is the generator, has an ability to hold back the power, because there is a PPA, which is a fixed tariff component, also an availability based tariff, and therefore that fellow will have an ability to stop generating till the time you pay, and therefore there's an ability there. On the other hand, the renewable doesn't have that ability, and that if you are a capacity which is must, if there is wind, you will have to obviously operate, and if there is solar shine, you will want to operate. So you don't have that ability, and therefore you get first hit probably in terms of not getting paid. So I think it's so I would see this more of a fundamental issue in terms of the problems which are there in the DISCOM side, not more in terms of the distinction or anything else, of course, but it translates into that sometimes, because unfortunately in the renewables, like I said, we don't have an ability to stop generating. We would want to generate even if they are not paying, and therefore the pile-up here is much more probably sort of aggravated than what it would appear to be in the case of a thermal capacity. But I mean, there are thermal capacities, there are states in thermal capacities which have not paid for a very long time also. So I think it's, therefore I would put it as an issue which is fundamental in terms of the distribution company's health rather than anything else.
Got it. I mean, I was just thinking a little funny take on that, but maybe it is like for the way a DISCOM may think that renewable players give them power whenever they want, right? Because it's not up to, it's a must-run status, and therefore similarly the DISCOM will say, I will pay you whenever I want. So and that's where it's getting a lot delayed. Where we see 12 months and all that, so anyways, that's on the lighter note.
I would also like to add, Sachin, I would also like to add to this question, because you have to see from the DISCOM perspective. When you see that a DISCOM is procuring power, what is the percentage of power which is procures from renewable side and what it procures from the conventional side? You see that it will be something like 85-15. Only 15% of power is procured from renewable side and 85% is from, and importantly, there is no variable cost for renewable side. There is nothing like no energy charges. Whereas for conventional side, there is energy charges. If you don't pay them for a long period, it is quite likely that they would stop operating, and then there will be clear-cut crisis for supply of power. So that is why this is another, because there is a limitation on their capacity to pay. So they prioritize accordingly. That's what I can think of if I think from the DISCOM perspective. That's how they decide to pay.
No,
but definitely, yeah. So that's what I wanted to say.
No, I would just like to add a little bit. If you, while I understand you are, kind of right now on the panel as a lender, but the point is that PFC, REC were actually one of the I would say the main conduit entity for the government to come out with this Atmanirbhar thing. So in some ways, there is a bit of proximity that you have with DISCOMs. You've infused funds to the DISCOMs. On that side, do you think that because we saw funds being infused in FY21, it was divided into 2 stages and all that was done. But now when we are in July, and some of the and let me say, even for thermal players, the backlog has again started building up. So I mean, the whatever one-time measure that they took, it was hardly enough, I would say, even for a year. How do you see that playing out? I mean, going forward, could there be another Atmanirbhar package? Difficult for you to say, but I'm just saying if you were to take a guess at that.
So let me start with that statement that all of us who are somewhere involved in the power sector know it very well. The problem lies in the distribution side and the revenue realization. Whether you are supplying to private DISCOM or a like government DISCOM, or you are a renewable energy generator, or you are a conventional energy, all these issues of like overdues is because of that. So unless and until, I think government since last almost like 20 years, they have come up with several like revival plan of this distribution companies, and still the issue have not improved substantially. And as you say, as on 31st of May, still the overdue of all the generators was to the tune of almost 80,000 crore. When and before Atmanirbhar package, it was around 1,20,000 crore. So there had been some improvement, but the important thing is, like, unless until the basic flaw or basic drawback in the distribution sector is not attended to or redressed completely, the situation is not going to improve. Every after 2-3 years, the situation is going to come back to the original one. So the game changer here is going to be that revamped distribution scheme, which government has already launched. And in that, if you see that, as I told you, that around 80,000 is overdue as on 31st May, the total subsidy which is to be paid to the DISCOMs, the total government department dues, if you consider that, it is around 1 lakh crore. So had those been received, possibly there would not have been any issue, whether it is renewable, whether it is conventional, or anybody, there would not have been any overdue. So
the state government dues, the state government
the revamp. Pardon?
I'm saying it's the state government dues which they have to pay the subsidies to their respective electricity departments.
So basically, Atmanirbhar package was also dealing with that, but still that cycle did not end. Again, it is started. So important thing is, like, with revamped implementation of revamped distribution scheme, which I feel that it will be a game changer, because prepaid metering scheme would come, and DISCOMs would be given on the reform-based thing. So they now under the present scenario, even if Ministry of Power, central government or the state government want to implement some reform in the power sector, they are unable to do through PFC or REC, because they take money, DISCOMs take money from banks, where there is nothing like any prudential norm or any reform which the bank stipulates. So basically, I feel that with this revamped distribution scheme, when there will, like, in next 2-3 years, the prepaid smart meters would be put in both industry, in all industries, commercial and then government departments, things are likely to improve.
Got it. Great, thanks for that. Let's move away from DISCOMs. And the other issue which the presentation also highlighted, and I'll bring it to this thing, Mr. Shah from Adani, a question to you. This is around the solar module prices. One of the key reasons why the solar tariffs were falling in the last few years, we saw one of the reasons was because the panel prices was declining, and in fact, there was a gap between the time when the person will win the bid and the time when he actually places the order. And if the prices have gone down in a way, it would have increased the return. to the equity holder there. But now we are seeing a little reversal there. So two parts, to the question. One is, what is your sense on this? Because I'm sure you would have done a fair bit of detail this thing. How are the prices likely to be? Is it a more of a short-term correction, or is it more like a long-term thing? And if it were to remain at elevated levels, then how would the procurement and risk mitigation for a developer would work? Because we, as the team had presented, if the panel prices were to further go up, some of the projects which have already been bid out may find themselves a little underwater. So over to you, Mr. Shah.
Thank you, sir. Such a very relevant question at this current point of time. See, we feel that this current uptrend in the module price is, primarily due to the shortage of polysilicon and few other factors. But the tariffs have already gone up to capture the increase in the raw material prices compared to what has happened. But we seriously feel as a group that this is a temporary phenomena, and in the long run, I feel that the downward trend in the module prices should continue with the innovation in the technology. Now, coming to the the increase in the pricing and the basic custom duty which the government has done, this may be any major short-term to immediate impact, because all the projects for which the bid have been submitted prior to 9th March 2021, whatever is the increase in the price is the pass-through. So it's qualify for a change in law, and developer will be suitably compensated. So the projects where the bids are being submitted post this announcement, now I'm sure that all the developers would be taking care of impact on the BCD effectively. From the long-term perspective, BCD is a welcome step and is one of the many steps that the government has taken. And this will help, to generate, establish additional around 10 gigawatts of capacity in India if that PLI schemes and other things are effectively implemented. So currently, as India has a limited annual capacity of 2,500 megawatt for solar PV cells, and operational annual capacity of 9 to 10 megawatts for PV modules. Now, as announced in the budget speech under the PLI scheme, 10,000 megawatt capacity of integrated solar PV manufacturing plants will be set up by 22-23. So with the direct investment of around 14,000 crore, I mean, this facility addition will substitute the imports and will help India to move closer to the capacity target, and will also help to contain the pricing overall. So we see that these steps. One is that the BCD imposition will be a pass-through. Those who have bidded earlier, the boost by the government through the PLI schemes will help to generate more modules in the country itself under Atmanirbhar, and the capacity which the other people, other countries like LONGi and other in China, they are also increasing their capacity. So we see that this is a short-term phenomena, and it should come, it should stabilize very soon. In fact, the prices which has gone to 26 cents has come down to 23 already. So that trend has already started. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks, Mr. Shah. So now, we have a good collection of audience, and we should open the floor to take some questions from there as well. Mridul, can you kindly ask the audience to share their question?
Yeah, so thanks, Sachin, and thanks to all the panelists. That was a wonderful discussion, and I'm sure all the participants will have some questions to ask. So there's a panel on your screen where you can punch in your questions, and Sudhir, maybe once the questions start coming in, if you can read out, then we'll try to see who's the best person to sort of address that. Yeah.
The first question. Sorry, I can see the questions, so I'll just take that. So the first question that I'm seeing is on the, it's a kind of a micro issue, but maybe it will have a larger ramification for the sector, is around the GIB, the Great Indian Bustard issue of Rajasthan. Now, I'm not sure who amongst you have assets there, or you have a better understanding. So I leave it to either Parag or Mr. Shah or Mr. Kasturi, the three developers we have. Basic question is that how is the GIB issue has a how can it impact the sector, and could it really have a long-term ramification?
No, so if the Supreme Court order doesn't get corrected or doesn't change, so Sachin, can I take that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that obviously it has a very large implication. It impacts around 17,000 square kilometer area of Rajasthan, which is 25% of the entire land in Rajasthan, and that too in a very good high radiation area. So it will really impact. In fact, if you see in the country, 80%, 90% of the capacity which has been won by different IPPs is coming up in Rajasthan only. So it really impacts a lot. The whole industry was under the impression that priority area is an area where Supreme Court will really intervene, and it will restrict its, the whole order will be restricted only to the priority area, which is hardly 3,000, 4,000 square kilometer. But adding this entire potential area also in the order is a huge surprise for the industry. And everybody has purchased land in the potential area. Everybody tried avoiding purchasing land in the priority area. So obviously we all are very hopeful that now MNRE, MOEF, along with the Ministry of Law, is about to file a petition either for correcting the Supreme Court order or taking adequate steps. So we are all hopeful that this order will be passed in a way which really looks into the other side of the story, which is how much the renewable industry is going to be impacted, rather than only looking at the one side of the story, which is about GIB. We hope that both the things can coexist, and if it really doesn't get corrected, it will definitely have a big impact on the industry.
Got it. The other question, thanks Parag. The other question that I have is that on the offshore, Europe has a fair bit of development happening on the offshore, but maybe the land is more scarce there. Any thoughts on how close we are in India to start making offshore wind farms? Maybe, sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
So look, we are very, very far off. There was a time, in fact, 2 years back, when expression of interest was asked by MNRE, and very good response. Around 36 submissions were made from leaders across the globe, but then nothing much happened. We tried doing something. NIWE and MNRE started developing 2 projects, one in Gujarat and one in Tamil Nadu. And people were expecting that bids would be out. But yes, we can understand the concerns of MNRE. The tariff would be very, very high as compared to the plain vanilla wind and solar projects, onshore projects. So somehow those tenders never happened. But recently, again, once we start interacting with the Joint Secretary Wind, he has been announcing that they are coming out with they are reviving these 2 projects, the offshore wind projects of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. What government needs to be very clear of is that the subsidy requirement or a VGF requirement would be very heavy. If we have to start this industry, there is no way people should expect a tariff anywhere close to an onshore wind tariff numbers. So government has to take that plunge. But yes, this is the way forward. Worldwide, this industry is growing. India has a large coastal area. So initial few bids, government has to subsidize and then take forward the sector.
Got it.
Other thing which I would like to add here, basically, the cost per megawatt. When you talk about wind, the cost per megawatt, which we feel like onshore wind, it is like 6 crore a megawatt. There it will be in excess of 20 crore a megawatt. And the kind of it's like affinity which we have about that minimum tariff, like 1 rupees 99 paise or 3 rupees, that is, it will be more than 10 rupees. So how far we are able to absorb that kind of tariff in our system, it depends on the readiness of that. Then only there is a feasibility of offshore wind farm development. Otherwise, it will remain as a pilot project, and it's like it will end at that.
Very valid point. You know, earlier in the discussion, we were talking about how 2 rupees 90 paisa is finding it difficult, you know, when there is a 2 rupee 40 paisa or, you know, that ballpark kind of this thing. So the order that we're talking about for offshore is completely different. So as you know, Parag mentioned, it will have to be very clearly with some subsidized this thing, and to kind of establish the proof of concept and then maybe kind of take it from there. So next question actually is for Mr. Jha. You know, it is on the weak performance of the wind sector, you know, in the FY21, and there was in fact even an earlier year, I don't remember, but maybe around 18 or 19, where there was the wind, many of the wind projects were kind of under this thing. So, you know, generally the funding happens at P90 level, but we are seeing now many of these projects are not achieving P90. As a lender, you know, how do you see that kind of impacting your decision making, you know, for you know, future wind energy projects? Are you comfortable with that? Do you think that 2 years out of last 5 years, I think many of the projects have underachieved? Ideally, it should be only once in 10 if I go by a simple probability. So what's your take on that as a lender?
Wind resource assessment is done by many leading agencies. And the important thing, if you go through their entire report, it comes with a lot of rider. It is not a simple thing. They give a particular CUF that it will achieve, but then they will also say that it depends on so many other factors. And when, at least in PFC, when we appraise that, we take into account of all those factors. And if you consider that, then whatever CUF which the report says, after putting the correction factor into that, the actual CUF at P90 would come lower than that. So when we appraise, we consider that. But considering all this, that yes, P90 level, whatever there has been change in wind pattern or something. Other part, as a lender, we have been very particular that power curve certification. Like if you see, like most of the wind farm, when they are set up, hardly their power curve test is being done. Normally, once it is set up, it is left, because power curve, if you have to go for certification, then at the construction stage also we have to make the necessary provisions. Very rarely this thing is being done. So we do not know whether it is because of wind profile or whether it is because of that particular WTG not meeting that their power curve. Other part, which I think as a lender, which we are also very keen, that we should not depend on, because normally wind manufacturers or these wind resource assessment agencies, they simulate. They do not have that actual site data for that particular wind farm. They actually take maybe 20 kilometers away. There is a mast which is at a much lower height than compared to this particular wind WTG height. And they simulate that factor, and then they compute that what will be the wind profile at that particular. So those things have to be tackled. At least 1 year data for that particular site has to be available before actually things get concluded. So those are the things as a lender we see that, and if that is not there, at least if there is any nearby wind farm, what is their performance of that wind farm, we are also seeing that. So these are the facts we always take into account when we appraise.
Got it. Next question is for Mr. Kasturi. You know, they're asking about InvIT. You know, how viable is InvIT as a platform for the long-term funding for renewable energy?
Yeah, no, I think obviously any structure, ultimately the objectives of all those structures is to ensure that you have adequate, maybe first of all, funding both on the equity and then on the debt side, and then you have a model which is able to then ensure sustainable growth for that kind of a platform. So I think InvIT is one of those structures. It's not specific that or necessary that one should do any kind of a growth only through an InvIT. We had evaluated InvIT for certain specific reasons which were specific to us, I think. So, and we did believe that it was providing a robust structure where you could have a sort of a moved or a portfolio into that, and then had a sustainable growth into that. But then there are different ways to look at it. So I think I would probably not get fixated on the kind of structure which is relevant, and I think it could be anything. I mean, like InvIT, obviously, each of the structures will have different kind of stakeholders coming into it. When InvIT as a structure is a yield play kind of a structure, and therefore the investors who are going to come into that would look at the fundamental robustness of the cash flows, and whether any portfolio, whether it is renewable or it is thermal, whether that has that fundamental robustness and certainty of the underlying assets will determine whether that structure is well suited for that. I mean, I think we have seen so many players doing InvIT, and one of the best, I think, the segments where the InvIT has been successful is obviously the transmission sector. So obviously the assets there are very robust, and the cash flows are very certain in terms of those. So I think we do believe that InvIT is a very good structure. There are, of course, issues in terms of what portfolio you want to move into the InvIT and whether the investors there are comfortable with that kind of a portfolio. But yeah, I think different structures could work differently.
Got it. Thanks, Mr. Kasturi. The next question is in terms of the backward integration of solar modules. Now that is something that the government of India has been attempting. There is a regulatory support. Maybe Mr. Shah, you can take this. What is your sense? How viable is the whole attempt at backward integration of solar module manufacturing? And since there is some incentive also being proposed, and one of the large business houses in the country has also announced some kind of factories, mega factories, giga factories there. So I mean, here we are not discussing any individual corporates, but as a concept level, because till now the entire solar module manufacturing is in some ways concentrated in one part of the world. So do you think India will be able to in a material way do full backward integration, and if there are any challenges to that?
No, I think Sachin, we do believe that what is the capital outlay through the PLI scheme which they have announced. I think that needs to be increased to at least 12,000 crore from current 4,500 crores. This will support at least 10 gigawatts, because the size, the level at which we are looking is much higher. The second important piece which we feel is create a separate incentive scheme for ancillaries like glass, EVA, backsheet, junction boxes, because that are also all ancillaries are also very relevant in order to boost this manufacturing kind of a stuff. So that's what is another area where one can look at. And then we have to create a separate scheme for the next generation technology as well, because these technologies are relatively much in advance, but for development of truly cutting edge technologies such as perovskite, tandem, etc., cell technology with the possible efficiency ranging up to 29%, you need a higher incentive to support this. So I think with this, the intention of the government is very clear and very supportive. Maybe more this effective implementation with the fast track such measures can help to increase this module manufacturing facility in the country.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Parag, any thoughts from you? How do you see? I mean, more from a pure commercial perspective. While government may incentivize to some extent, but unless the whole thing makes commercial sense, I don't think Indian government will really pump in too much money as well. They are also very careful. So, is there a strong case for backward integration?
So, if we look at the global demand supply in the module industry, then as against 115 gigawatt of capacity addition, module capacity worldwide is 300 gigawatt plus, and so is. If you see the entire value chain, other than polysilicon, which Mr. Shah said is in short supply, which also is expected to bounce back to 200 gigawatt plus next year, there is no need for any further manufacturing capacity if you look at the global demand and supply. But obviously, in Indian government is on the back of 40% BCD is trying to have its market of its own, and the whole objective is to generate more employment and so on and so forth. So in that context, if our internal demand is 10 to 15 gigawatt and module supply is, let's say, limited to 15 to 20 gigawatt, in that case, it will be a good business for module manufacturers. But what we are seeing is that it's not going to be just 15, 20. The way announcements are coming, it seems like that 40 gigawatt plus of module capacity is under construction. If that would be the case, and the number of bids for the new projects in India is restricted to 10 to 15 gigawatt, which we just spoke about, then Indian manufacturers have to start depending upon exports also, and they have to be more competitive in the global market. And that is where the question is that as far as domestic demand is concerned, that they have a protection of 40% BCD, but will they be able to compete in the international market? But overall movement is really great. After a long time, a lot of policies initiative failed, but after a long time, now we see real capacity addition happening at least in the modules and cells.
Absolutely. No, that's a good perspective, Parag, and you're right. I mean, while Indian manufacturers, if they're looking at only domestic demand, then it's one level. But for them to be able to compete globally, they will have to be cost effective. That actually, I mean, we have in some industries we managed to be globally competitive. We will just have to see whether we are. I mean, a lot of industries, in fact. But this will be a test case, I would say, whether we were able to compete in a surplus industry, as you explained. You know, it's the current capacity is almost 2 times of the current demand. So to that extent, you will have to really cut them on price, and that will become very critical. Yeah, Mr. Jha,
I would also like to add here.
Please,
yeah,
please.
Yeah, I would also like to add here, because of late we have been receiving various solar module manufacturing proposals, and what we have felt that generally those proposals are either module assembly or they import wafer. In very rare cases they import silica ingot, and hardly we have not come across a proposal. Maybe there will be few, but it is very less, where there is a proposal of module manufacturing with silica ingot manufacturing. And I understand that the maximum contribution is in the, if some manufacturer is also manufacturing silica ingot, and unless until they do that, they can't be competitive, because the contribution, large part of this contribution comes from the silica ingot manufacturing side. So if they want to become internationally competitive beyond the domestic market, they must have this silica ingot manufacturing facility in their solar module manufacturing device.
Absolutely,
this is where the key is.
No, you're right. I agree completely, and that is also very capex intensive. So they will have to kind of invest fair bit of money in that, and that is where Parag's earlier point of, so you really have to have scale, cost efficiencies, put in money, and then only you will be able to kind of really compete through the value chain. Perfect. So I think we have overshot our time by almost 10-15 minutes. So with that, I would like to, we've also covered most of the questions that were put to us. So with that, I would like to close the panel discussion. Amod, over to you.
Yeah. So Sachin, thanks a lot, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been a wonderful deliberations in terms of the questions that Sachin asked, and then subsequently what came from the audience. So with this, I would actually like to thank everyone, including all the attendees, and close this webinar for now. Mr. Kasturi, Mr. Jha, Kaushal Bhai, Parag Bhai, and Sachin, of course, you. Thanks again for sparing time to have these discussions with all of us. Thanks a lot. At the end of the webinar, attendees, you will subsequently receive an email for feedback. If you can respond to that, that will be really nice. With that, I'll announce closure of this webinar. Thanks a lot, and have a nice evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Sachin ji. Thank you, Amod ji.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My
Pleasure. Always a
Thank
pleasure.
Thank
Thank you.
you.